The oil industry was the beacon of hope in the 19th century. Machinery, factories, cars, and ships all expanded drastically. It was a time of change, a time to overcome the restrictions that had so often held people back. There is a story that exists, one that details the origins of that era, the one that has brought us to where we are today and influenced the world as we know it. This is not that story. Our story begins in a small cottage on the edges of the southeast side of London. Winifred, or Winnie as we know her, was preparing for another day of work at the lab. Her morning was unextraordinary as expected. She'd awoken at her usual time, had breakfast, and was making sure everything was in order before she left for work. Winnie gathered her coin purse and locked up her cottage, setting off down the street towards the lab where she worked. Children chased each other across the street, tossing balls back and forth and poking fun, all the while weaving their way through the legs of the adults. Winnie smiled and waved at the milkman. Today was going to be a good day. She could feel it deep inside her core. Perhaps she would finally receive the approval for the new manual sorting machine she'd recently proposed. Or, if that didn't work out, something that could fasten papers together so one never had to worry about them being separated or falling out of order. New inspiration and ideas filled her mind. In fact, Winnie was so lost in thought, she failed to hear the coach driver calling out for her to move out of the way. Coming through, out of the way, you rascals. You've got no business blocking up the street. Watch it, lady. You go home to your parents. I said move, woman. Winnie looked up and gasped, barely managing to stumble out of the way as the carriage charged past, the horses kicking up dirt and mud along the way. Slow down, you buffoon, she cried after him, raising her fist in anger. Her protests went unheard, the carriage already too far away, and she grumbled during the rest of her walk to work, only able to comfort herself with the fact that she hadn't been unfortunate enough to fall into the large mud puddles that collected at the side of the road. Winnie plastered a smile on her face and hummed under her breath as she walked into the lab, greeting her coworkers with a nod. Just because she had a rough start to the day didn't mean it would continue. But for some reason, none of her coworkers would meet her eye. It was a tad curious for them to be acting so strangely, and she'd, admittedly, already had a very strange morning, but a day spent tinkering and working on experiments would set her mind at ease, she was sure. Winifred, do you have a moment? Charles, her boss, asked, interrupting her work.
Yeah, sure, what's up?
Winifred, listen. You've done great work for us, and we appreciate how you've helped on the past few projects, but...
Yeah, they were all really successful.
Yes, but I'm afraid we're going to have to let you go.
Wait, what?
I know it may come as a bit of a shock, but we just think it's for the best.
I need reasons. Like, I worked my butt off here. Like, I thought this was going really well.
I know it may seem like a shock, but we just don't think women belong in science.
Whoa. You went there. So a room full of men with very small minds and no creativity. And there's no women in science? That's crazy. Oh, I'm out of here.
Winnie huffed and turned on her heel, stalking out of the lab without a glance behind her. Her bravado and confidence carried her out the front door, but the walk back to her cottage was enough to inspire doubt. What if she wasn't smart enough to be a scientist? What if she didn't have the skills to be better? What if everything she'd ever been told was true? Winnie shuffled into her personal lab at home, It was nothing as incredible as what she had on hand at her job. Well, her old job. But it was enough. She stood at her table, staring at the array of tools and parts, waiting for her to fit them together into something new that worked just right. Something that would help people. Something that would change the world. Just as she began to consider giving up on science for good, the sound of a kettle whistling broke through the tumultuous thoughts rampaging around her mind. She looked up, wondering when she'd put the kettle on. Tea was the last thing on her mind, but as she listened to the shrill whistle and watched the white steam billow from its spout, a thought struck her. She'd been spending months working on manual machines, doing any number of processes, but that was only the beginning. There was so much more possibility beyond that. Steam, gears, automation. Were people even needed at all when there was technology? Ideas, plans, projects, all of them filled Winnie with new hope. Tomorrow was a new day, and she was going to change the world as she knew it. The next morning was not an unextraordinary morning. Winnie didn't return to the lab. She stayed home. Her ideas, bigger than before. The future, more hopeful than it had ever been. Pocket watches were just the first step. Machines, those were everywhere. They could sort, yes, but they could also print books and cook food. They could transport people and store information too. Machines could be alive. They could be people. They could be us. Unfortunately, or fortunately, humanity is not so quick to be replicated. But in failure, there is always possibility. People may laugh at Winnie. They may make fun of her and call her crazy, but she had an idea, and she was going to make it work. People, they called Winnie crazy. They told her it was never going to work. How was steam supposed to power anything? How could it be strong? How was the world ever going to change just because she noticed some puffs of steam coming from a kettle? People called Winnie crazy, but only at first. Once they realized the power steam held and the potential Winnie's inventions had, they were quick to start working on it too, fighting to capture the true power Steam possessed. It's been many years since then. Winnie's name has been forgotten. They've forgotten the names she was called, the doubt that she would ever amount to anything. Yet, she proved them wrong. She wasn't crazy. She just noticed something anyone else having an unextraordinary morning wouldn't notice. But that single observation was enough to usher in the age of steam. The punk, well, that came a little bit later.